Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee. Please join me and my guests on this next interview. In the wake of President Zelenskyy's recent meetings in Washington and London, Europe's security dynamics are under intense scrutiny. The contentious encounter between Zelenskyy and President Trump has raised questions about the stability of Western alliances and the future of support for Ukraine. Given Poland's strategic position and its leadership within the European Union, how should we interpret these developments? Well, joining us today on TVP World to provide insight from a Polish security perspective is Bartłomiej Kot, Program Director of the Warsaw Security Forum. Hello, sir, and welcome to TVP World.
Lovely to be here.
So first of all, can you help us understand what's the most important outcome of the London summit?
Well, of course, we had a lot of announcements related to the support to Ukraine. There is, of course, this statement that the countries will simply support Ukraine. This is like big in itself because of what happened in the Oval Office. So that's, of course, the European reaction to that. There is also an announcement related to the equipment, to the military equipment that will be delivered to Ukraine, especially from the British side. That will also include, of course, money spent from the British taxpayers' pockets. But in the end, in my opinion, there are at least two big statements that we should actually follow from this summit. The first one being the one that the European allies, for the first time ever, in my opinion, announced that they will participate altogether with Ukrainians in a process of defining what is the goal of this war. This is actually something which was the Biden administration always failed to deliver. This was like a talking point from the Republican side, from Donald Trump's side. And honestly speaking, there was never there was actually a clearly defined goal from the European side. Always we were actually talking about supporting Ukraine as long as it takes. Mm-hmm. And giving Ukrainians the space to define that. And here, for the first time, it is Europeans saying that we want to participate in the definition of this goal. Right. And the second thing, which I would also underline, it is the fact that actually the European leaders communicated to President Zelenskyy that, well, with all what happened in the Oval Office, he still has to make a deal in a sense with Donald Trump, because this war cannot be won without Americans. This is what I take from the London summit.
Right. Like, speaking of participation, there's also this conversation going on with Keir Starmer apologizing to the leaders of the Baltic states for not inviting them. What do you think led to the decision of them not being invited? Do you think that's actually a big deal, or?
Well, this is the coalition of the willing. This is the format in which we are right now discussing these issues. This comes firstly from the fact that there is also a part of the European Union that is not necessarily that much aligned when it comes to the future of the Ukrainian war efforts. I'm talking about Hungary and Slovakia, of course. The goal was to have like a clearly defined, fast decision-making process, and this could have been delivered also in this coalition of the willing format. There is, of course, an argument from the Baltic Sea states. First of all, there is an issue that these countries they were one of the biggest supporters to Ukraine per capita, and also when it comes to the share of GDP, always actually standing behind Ukraine. But the truth is that Starmer and the British government is focusing very much on these countries that either have a very big political role to play because of their economic power, like being part of G7, for example, or actually, such as Poland, that they have quite good and functional and big, let me put it that way, armed forces that would be necessary in order to strengthen the potential of the European defense.
There's a recent report from a Washington Post. I'm going to quote them here. It says, European diplomats are expecting Donald Trump to withdraw the 20,000 U.S. troops sent to Europe by Joe Biden in response to the Russian invasion. Now, if that actually comes true, that would also include like 500 to 6,000 currently in Poland. Do you think that is a likely scenario, and what would that mean for European defense?
Well, this is something which actually Polish diplomacy would have to work on hard, because I understand that if President Trump wants to withdraw American troops, which is to some degree predictable because of the long discussion that was happening between Europeans and Americans on the essence of the presence of the American troops in Europe, who, that Europe would have to be more self-reliant when it comes to its own defense, spending more on defense and security, boosting the potential of their own troops. But on the other hand, I can imagine as well that Trump, while securing some of the American presence in Europe, even limited, could also make a decision related to moving these troops from Germany to Poland, for example. Like limiting the number of troops in Europe not necessarily must be perceived as the lowering of the defense of the eastern flank, and this is where actually the Polish diplomacy should act a lot in order to communicate with the Trump administration that where actually the American soldiers are needed is Poland, and this is not only because of Ukraine, but this is mainly because of the defense of the eastern flank. This is mainly because of the defense of American interests, because President Trump thinks in American interest way, and the presence of American troops in Poland is not because of Ukraine. It is merely because of the American interests here, given also the economic and trade potential between Poland and the U.S. So even a change in a narrative, a change in politics, in policies related to Ukraine may not necessarily mean automatically lowering of the Polish-American alliance.
Right. I wanted to touch on the Polish diplomacy that you've been discussing because, the Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk actually kind of echoed that sentiment as well, saying that when Donald Trump criticizes European defense, when it comes to NATO spending, he always tends to kind of single out Poland as actually the good example. He would say things like the Europeans aren't pulling their weight, except for Poland, they're great. And the Polish Prime Minister also said that perhaps this relationship and Poland has been a shining example of actually taking defense seriously, would give us a leg up when it comes to negotiating, conducting diplomacy with Donald Trump. What's your assessment of this take?
And I understand it this way. If Donald Trump wants to play stick and a carrot attitude policy related to what is happening related to the war in Ukraine, he would also have to have not only a carrot but also a stick to the potential Russian re-attack in Ukraine once actually the ceasefire is achieved. He would have to actually form a kind of a backstop in which he will be ready for reaction if Russians would start another war. In this scenario, the Polish defense potential and also the presence of American troops in Poland is very necessary. That's one issue. But second issue is that once actually Prime Minister Tusk talks about the Polish defense potential, and Poland as a model ally in NATO, it is not only related to the US, it is also related to our European allies. I know that there is right now a drift into, as I said, Europe became more self-agent, more self-reliant when it comes to the defense and security, spending more money on defense. But honestly speaking, it cannot be equal to the scenario in which countries of the eastern flank would spend 5, 6 or more % of GDP, and we would still have some Western European allies lagging behind and actually treating the defense spending of the eastern flank as the security umbrella that they, simply speaking, exchange from Washington to Warsaw right now. So in that very regard, I'm repeating even the arguments of President Trump. From the Polish point of view, is highly effective and should be done, because with all the perks and irks of Trump's presidency, when it comes to to pointing out the flaws of the European defense, he is simply right, and we should acknowledge that.
Right. So when it comes to the rearming of European Union and the adjustment of security in this part of the world, how do you see that adjustment being made? Like if Americans kind of reduce their support and the Europeans have to step up to perhaps, like, what proportion of contribution do you foresee this new dynamic?
Well, first of all, we should talk about certain capabilities. Of course, when it comes to the nuclear deterrent, because this is the most important right now. Prime Minister Tusk yesterday was talking about the numbers of the population numbers, that the European population is bigger than the one of the US, and far more bigger than the one of Russia, and that means that we should not be that much afraid of the potential Russian activities. The truth is, however, that it is all about having a credible deterrence towards Russia. The US has the credible deterrence towards Russia, and this is not only in conventional war, this is also the nuclear potential. The nuclear armory. In Europe, you have only France and Britain that possess the nuclear capabilities. Of course, there is a huge discussion about to what extent this is an effective potential, but this should be actually a big discussion right now happening in Europe, to what extent the European nuclear capabilities can be treated as a nuclear deterrence against Russia, and to what extent Europe could actually spend more money on and become more effective in actually spending this money on this simply European nuclear deterrent. This is one thing. And second thing is, of course, we are focusing a lot on defense spending. That's great. Of course, this is also a matter of a political statement towards Russia, but this is not enough. I mean, of course, you can spend a lot of money on defense. The question is how you spend this money, and secondly, whether you have the political will to use these weapons once you already have them. And this is probably the biggest shift that should happen right now in the minds and hearts of the European stakeholders. That spending money on defense means that at some point maybe you would have to pull the trigger, and you should be ready to do that. I mean, this way of conducting politics, once the projection of power is also a part of your foreign policy, should be once again in our menu.
Right, so still a lot to balance there, but in the meantime, thank you so much for your input and insight. Appreciate it. Thank you. And thank you for tuning into this edition of World Talks. For more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.